No other way to put it. Colorado, Ole Miss, disastrous days, but one surprised me more than the other.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this reaction episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view post the craziness that is this greatest sport in the world. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can get a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get 150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I've got thoughts on Ohio State and Arizona State, who impressed wildly in their pursuit of conference championships. But first, the teams that didn't go quite as well. So, who surprised you more, Colorado or Kansas? The answer is Colorado. This is more surprise. I did not foresee Kansas. I knew Kansas could win the game, but I picked Colorado for a couple of reasons. Number one, Kansas's offense wasn't actually that great against BYU last week. It was kind of a BYU win against BYU. It was a little fluky, and it came down to like 2 plays. And BYU has now been exposed in the last couple of weeks as being a good but not great team. I know they had a Hail Mary at the end. I have thoughts on all of that coming up later. But Colorado, did you know that they hadn't allowed 200 yards on the ground in a game this year? They played Utah last week, whose identity offensively for 20 years has been running the football, has been physical, win in the trenches, sort of grinded out affair. And it was the smoke and mirrors ground game of Kansas that went for 330 yards. 330 yards. The last time I came on here and was critical of Colorado's defense, they allowed a drive against Kansas State at home to a team that can't throw the football that well. They let them go right down the field in just a few plays. That pales in comparison to whatever we watched earlier today. I can't understand how this happened. Everything you heard about Colorado going into this game was 100% true. It wasn't overblown. It wasn't a media concoction that Colorado's defensive line was the strength of this team. It wasn't some drummed up Buffs fans overhyped narrative that Colorado is significantly improved and that they on paper are a better team than Kansas. But all of a sudden, Kansas goes for 330 on the ground. The previous high was 185 by Kansas State. So I guess it's just the Kansas schools that know how to run on Colorado. Still, though, I don't give this an outright lose label for the Buffs. It's incredibly disappointing. It is that is not the sort of effort that Colorado was capable of going into a week in which they completely control their own destiny to win the Big 12 championship game. But they can still get there. That path to the playoff for Colorado, it's still alive. But I didn't see this one coming. I believed in the Buffs. You talk about 3 of the best wins possible and unexpectedly for Kansas in the last couple of weeks. Where was this Kansas team? I have said many times on here about how foolish I have felt for picking Kansas to make the Big 12 championship game. Well, Drake Toll and I have locked on Big 12 shouldn't feel quite as crazy anymore. This was the Kansas team that we were promised before the year. They just waited until the latter half of the season, and in consecutive weeks, they beat Iowa State, BYU, and Colorado. The upper echelon of the Big 12 conference. Kansas knocked them off in a row. This was the Kansas team I saw on paper before the year, but I hadn't seen it on the field. They had less than 250 yards of offense last week in their win against BYU. They shouldn't have been able to do this to Colorado, but this is why you play games on the field, not on paper. What an incredible win for Kansas. They could get bowl eligible, and that would suddenly feel like a major win for Lance Leipold and company, who it turns out still can indeed coach football. Is Deion Sanders done, toast, overrated, overhyped? I mean, most people picked him to win this game, so in this particular instance, sure, they are overhyped. But anything that happens for Colorado once they got to the 8-win mark, all gravy. All gravy. Sure, they controlled their own fate to the playoffs. Sure, they could still get there, and they'll need some chaos to ensue. I haven't looked at all the tiebreaker scenarios, frankly, but Colorado's still in the Big 12 title hunt. They could be one of the highest-ranked conference champions at the end of the year. But you just don't feel quite as good about that. Because if Kansas can go for 330, well, what's Oklahoma State going to do next week? I don't know. I don't think Oklahoma State's very good. In fact, I know for a fact, everybody knows they're not very good, and Colorado's better, but they should have been better than Kansas, and they just weren't. So for those of you that want me to come on here and just absolutely crush Deion Sanders and the Buffs, and they were overrated, and they're this, that, and the other thing, maybe they just had an off day. Tell me, if you picked Kansas to win this game, did you have them going for 330 on the ground? 330 yards? There's no way. There's no way. Sometimes you just have a one-off game where you go, well, that was just not our best day of football. And it wasn't Colorado's best day of football. But still, they're still a good team. Ole Miss is still a good team, but they're not a playoff team anymore. When you talk about disastrous outcomes, this one doesn't fall into that particular category. This one is too funny to be labeled something as tragic as a disaster. I say this as someone who thought Ole Miss would go 10-2 and get into the playoff before the season. Looks like I'm going to miss that prediction by one game, because Ole Miss is going to miss the playoff this year because of losses to Florida and Kentucky. If they'd won either one of those games, this new wonderful 12-team playoff that you all love so much wouldn't have let Ole Miss, or was going to let Ole Miss in. They wouldn't have had a chance in, but they don't have a chance now. But none of that matters. Hypotheticals, this format, that format, doesn't matter, because Ole Miss is done. This is an embarrassing situation for the Rebels, because the way you have to look at this if you're Ole Miss is, if this team can't get to a 12-team playoff, what team is? How big does the playoff have to get expanded for Ole Miss to be a part of it? But the reason that I describe this as too hilarious to be real is, do you remember who people like me, or I don't know how many Florida fans, were calling for Billy Napier's job after they were embarrassed on their home field twice in their first 3 games? That was an unacceptable display of Florida Gators football. Well, the last 2 months of Florida Gators football, that's what it's supposed to be, or at least a lot closer to it. I mean, what if they don't have a quarterback injury against Tennessee? I don't know. Seems like Florida can play with anybody in the league, because if Ole Miss beat Georgia 28-10, by the way, if they can lose to Florida, well, who can't Florida play with? You watch, the committee's going to rank Florida at 6-5. They will maybe not 6-5. I bet you they do it at 7-5. You know, if they win a bowl game, go 8-5, they'll be in that top 25 at the end of the year. I can guarantee it, because this is the toughest schedule we've seen in recent memory, and Florida is going to a bowl game. How about that? And how about Ole Miss? Another letdown, another disappointment. Was I surprised? Yeah, I thought Ole Miss would win the football game because they were playing great. But guess what? Even after the bye week, Ole Miss had an emotional letdown, and 2 fourth-down decisions that'll be debated, discussed from now until the end of time. I understand you got the big fella who can run the football and has been really good in short yardage situations. But once Florida stopped it once, when he hasn't been stopped all year, Lane Kiffin's decision to go back to it is going to be, shall we say, discussed at bars and in living rooms on Thursday for Thanksgiving and whatnot, all across Oxford and in the greater Ole Miss fandom that spreads nationwide. That is going to be something that pops into people's minds. You did it once. Why'd you do it again? Why'd you do it again? And here's the thing. Lane Kiffin's an offensive guy. Trey Harris, yeah, he was in and out of the game, caught a long touchdown, got hurt later. Like, no matter what excuse you want to come up with, it wasn't Lane Kiffin's defense or a lack thereof that kept them short. It was their inability to score points. Go back to the Kentucky game. They couldn't score. They couldn't score enough points. You telling me you couldn't go get 27 on the road against Florida? Well, yeah, that's what Lane Kiffin's telling you. So the guy who was supposed to be the next Florida head coach just lost to the guy who a bunch of people wanted removed. I mean, you can't script that stuff any better. That's an outright win feeling for Florida, and that is an outright bottom of the barrel loser feeling for Ole Miss this week, because their playoff hopes done, should not be in. As I'm recording the show, Texas A&M fighting for their playoff lives against Auburn. It's not going very well. We'll see if that changes come my Monday show. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. Those are the teams that didn't do well, but a couple teams did. Did you watch what Ohio State did? They reminded people of something, and Arizona State proved something to people. That's all coming up next. right after we talk about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks, and it's the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, Texas. 30 of them are indeed available. And Prize Picks now offers Venmo for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals into your account this sports season. So let me ask you a question. What are you waiting for? If you want daily fantasy action, Prize Picks is the place to go. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege. Get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's download the Prize Picks app using the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So Indiana lost. Well, I thought that would happen. Thought they'd hang around, but not completely and utterly shocked that Ohio State ends up winning the game 38-15. So Curt Cignetti's team, on the one hand, was exposed. On the other hand, is right in line with what the college football intelligentsia have been saying for a long time. Recruiting matters. That's what that game was. Indiana had an entire quarter. That offense that has been throwing it all over the field against everybody they've played, and they've beaten them so badly, they put up 15 points. They had a quarter where they didn't gain a single yard. Yeah, that's what happens. That's what can happen. That game was Ohio State realizing its full potential. Because when a team that has more talent and more NFL players on both sides of the ball plays to its potential against a team that doesn't, that's what it looks like. And guess what? If you play that game out 10 times, Indiana is going to win 1, maybe 2 of them. They're not going to win 0. But that's contingent upon Ohio State not playing its best football game. Indiana and BYU, very similar. Miami, sort of. I'm going to talk about Miami more later on today's show because that's not exactly the same thing. Indiana and BYU are the examples here. When you have these teams that don't have a bunch of blue chip prospects or don't have a bunch of NFL talent all over the field, and they're punching above their weight, so to speak, on paper, sometimes you can have a team like TCU that just keeps punching above their weight. They just keep finding ways to win. It's why you play the games on the field. The downside to that is what can happen here, or what happened to TCU in the national championship game. When you do come upon a roster that's more talented, if they don't make mistakes, then they are going to beat you, and they're going to do so soundly. Ohio State reminded everybody that they can win the national championship. Ohio State reminded everybody that Will Howard's a really good quarterback, throws an early interception, doesn't seem to faze him. That guy can be really, really accurate. I said going into this game, I thought Indiana had the better quarterback. Heck, I still might feel that way. But he does not have the better team around him. That answer lies with Will Howard. Curtis Rourke was under pressure in this game. Will Howard, not so much. Will Howard's got NFL wide receivers. Curtis Rourke doesn't. They could not consistently separate from the Ohio State defensive backs, who I think played their best game of the year. Jim Knowles, defense coordinator for the Ohio State Buckeyes, give him the game ball. Give him the game ball. He absolutely deserves it. And for all you people that go on and on for reasons I can't quite figure out, but it happens anyway, about Ryan Day not being able to win big games, what does this classify as? What is it? Well, they were a big favorite. They should have done this, that. If they had lost the football game, you would have been going on about, well, Indiana was just underrated. Indiana this. Like those sorts of conversations, frankly, they tire me out pretty quickly. Ryan Day's a really good football coach. This was a really good performance. This was two-way, complete and utter dominance by Ohio State. Completely. They were in control from the moment the game kicked off after the first possession each way. Indiana gets a stop. Indiana gets a score. Ohio State dominated the game the rest of the way. Michigan's coming into the shoe next week. Good luck. Because Ohio State's got one thing on their mind. We want a rematch with Oregon, win the Big Ten, get a bye, play for national championship. They look like a national championship contender out there. Indiana, on the other hand, is going to play Purdue next week, who stinks, and they are going to beat them into oblivion. Because when you get beat like this for the first time, I imagine Curt Cignetti's going to find the way to motivate his team to get him to play Purdue at a level that is worried about Indiana and not worried about Purdue. So I imagine they'll go out and win big, and I pray the committee doesn't fall into the trap. They might not be allowed to fall into the trap of putting in a 10-2 SEC team over Indiana. You know why? Because Indiana is going to end the season 11-1, but Ole Miss is 9-3. And Texas A&M, by the time I'm done uploading the show, could very well have a third loss. And you're not putting those teams in. So I think Indiana will be just fine. They should be just fine. And when they win next week, they should be a college football playoff team. But they showed what their ceiling is. They showed that if a team that has more talent across the board plays the way they're capable, they're not going to be able to keep up. And that's okay. What do you think Indiana's recruiting classes can do after this season? What do you think Curt Cignetti has done on the trail? What do you think he's going to be able to do on the trail after he just put up the first ever 10-win season in Bloomington and signed a contract extension? I imagine he's going to go out and hit the portal. I imagine he'll go and hit the recruiting trail as well. Indiana didn't have talent across the board. That's okay. Doesn't mean in the 12-team playoff they shouldn't be allowed to get in. They certainly will have a good opportunity to do so. So too will Arizona State, who controls their own destiny to win the Big 12 and go to, I mean, you talk about unexpected teams. Indiana, Arizona State, both had preseason win totals of 4.5. Kenny Dillingham should be the coach of the year in the Big 12. He just beat a guy who was in the running, Kalani Sitake and BYU. Deion Sanders just lost again. And we'll see what happens with the Buffs. A lot of season can still play out. But if I had to vote right now, Kenny Dillingham's the coach of the year in the Big 12. This shouldn't have been able to be turned around this quickly. Back to their Pac-12 days, RIP. Arizona State has long been described as a sleeping giant. This is what it's supposed to look and feel like, where the students get onto the field too early because they're too overzealous, waiting for this breakthrough moment, and Kenny Dillingham just delivered it. This was the biggest game in a long time in Tempe, and Kenny Dillingham's team came out. I know they won by 5. You watched that football game. I watched that football game, most of it anyway. Arizona State's a better football team. Yep, BYU came back. Yep, BYU had a Hail Mary at the end. It was all wild and crazy. They get down to the 1 yard. I mean, it was almost the most BYU victory imaginable. But it turns out that style of football is not sustainable to win a conference championship. But in the Big 12, it could be. It still could be for BYU. The season is not, this is not an outright lose feeling for me. This is lean lose for BYU because they're still in it, just like Colorado. It stinks to lose, but your primary goal, winning the conference and getting into the playoff, it's still available to you. But it's available to Arizona State as well. This is not a fluky football team. This is not a team that is scraping by. This is just a good, well-coordinated, they locked up their coordinators with extensions before this game. This is just a really good, well-coached football team that plays tough, hard-nosed, gritty football. And the duel in the desert next week is going to be the opportunity for Arizona State to have their season spoiled by Arizona. It was supposed to be the other way around in some people's view, but it's flipped. It is completely flipped. And Arizona State, this is not a run where you watch a football team and go, they're just scraping by, they're bound to lose. No, they're going toe-to-toe with Big 12 title contenders, and they're building 3-possession leads. They have done that in consecutive weeks. They did it on the road. They did it here at home. One of their 2 Big 12 losses came when Jeff Sims had to start at quarterback. When Sam Levitt's been there, they've lost 1 time. They've lost 1 time. On the road against Texas Tech. I tell you what, Kenny Dillingham is just, that guy's a heck of a football coach. Heck of a football coach. 9-2 are the Sun Devils. Can you believe that? I picked Arizona State as an over win total team this year. I didn't see this coming. This is the story of my preseason predictions on the Big 12. I'm right or wrong, but I wasn't right enough or I wasn't wrong enough. Colorado is going to be good, but not great. Well, they might be kind of great by Big 12 standards. Arizona State, they're not finishing last. They could finish first. Pick to finish last, and Arizona State has a path to finish first in the Big 12 and make the college football playoff. And it's absolutely deserved. It's absolutely deserved. BYU going into this game, remember, was ranked, wait for it, number 14 in the country. So Arizona State's about to become a top 15 team with a conference championship game berth likely still looming. I mean, this is just a monumental win. This was the sort of season, this was the sort of game and stretch run that Arizona State was supposed to be able to have in the view of people like myself in year 3, not in year 2. Back-to-back 3-9 seasons, and boom, he's gotten it right quickly. Never underestimate the ability to turn things around quickly in college football nowadays. Curt Cignetti at Indiana, Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State, they have completely flipped it around. Heck, Deion Sanders at Colorado, it's taken till year 2. But boy, what a battle it was. And Arizona State got a big rivalry game next week. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. How about teams that won, but it was kind of somewhere in between? Well, one of those teams did that. One of those teams did not. Is Miami the best team in the ACC? I don't know. I don't know. But Miami did something absolutely filthy again, and that's coming up next. First, let's talk about Z-Biotics. Do you think anyone's going to be drinking at Arizona State tonight? I bet you they're already underway, and they should be getting going first with Z-Biotics. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel better tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more. Get 15% off your order when you use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE at checkout. Z-Biotics is back with a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. But as someone who has experience with this product, let me tell you, you will not need that refund. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege. Use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE at checkout for 15% off. Then check out our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook because, well, they're not number 2 or 3 or 4. So where are they? Yeah, they're number 1. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel.com, that's the place to go to get America's #1 sportsbook. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Is SMU the best team in the ACC? Legitimate question here. Legitimate question here. They're unbeaten. Miami is not. Now, Miami covered. And I said on my score prediction at Miami, you got to prove it or I'm not going to pick you to cover here, which they did by 4 whole points. Miami has come up with the most disgusting, I mean filthy awful, for those of you that are gamblers out there, backdoor covers, front door covers, I guess it would be, late escapes to cover the spread. They can score points quicker than anybody in the country. In the second half, Wake Forest was competitive. They were competitive with Miami. There was a small sliver of upset potential. It was 17-14 in the second half, and then Miami won on a 25-0 run. There was a defensive touchdown in this game. There were turnovers. There was Miami scoring quickly. They can just throw the ball all over the yard. But I'm still left wondering, are they the most impressive team in the ACC? I don't know that the answer to that question is yes. Because SMU is just continuing to roll through this conference. Remember the league that SMU got into only because they bought their way into it? Well, guess what? Money talks in college athletics, and SMU's only loss is a 3-point home defeat in week 3 to BYU, who will still be ranked in the top 25 after their road loss to Arizona State. But here are the point totals that Kevin Jennings has led this SMU offense to, because this is a name you need to know. If SMU ends up squaring off with Miami in the ACC championship game, guess what? There are going to be so many yards in that game, it's going to make your head spin because the quarterbacks are going to be spinning the ball all over the yard. Here are the point totals on SMU's 8-game winning streak. 66, 42, 34, 40, 28, 48, 38, and 33. Do you think Rhett Lashley knows offense? Do you think he knows? I think he's got a pretty good idea. The only team that's held them under 30 in this win streak is Duke and Manny Diaz, who are in action as I record this particular show. And they're beating Virginia Tech 14-7, but, low stakes game there. But SMU just continues to impress. You may not think very much of going on the road and blowing out Virginia. Fine. Virginia may or may not be a bowl team this year. They're sitting at 5-6. They've got Virginia Tech next week in the in-state rivalry matchup there. But SMU's got Cal. They're at home, and they're going to be fine. Cal, by the way, scraped by Stanford. Oh, boy, the Cardinal almost did it, but alas, a 14-0 run by Cal in the fourth quarter. Turns out that helps to get you a victory. But I just wonder, how this ACC picture is going to shake out. Clemson played the Citadel this week, and I think they should be left out of the ACC title game for that fact alone. They don't control their own fate. It's SMU and Miami. If SMU and Miami win next week, Miami's going to Syracuse. And everybody in Clemson, South Carolina, as they get ready to take on a good top 25 Gamecocks team, that's going to be a phenomenal football game, by the way. They are going to be watching very carefully what happens up in Syracuse, New York. That's the only way Clemson can get in. But SMU's good. SMU's good. And here's what I want to pose to you. I was talking about Indiana and the prospect of them being an 11-1 team, and they should get into the playoff, and I think in all likelihood they will. What do you do with an 11-2 ACC championship game loser? What do you do? What's the committee going to do? Because now you have the very real possibility of far fewer 10-2 SEC teams than we previously thought. Auburn's up 21-7 right now on Texas A&M. LSU is out of the picture. And Ole Miss is out of the picture at 9-3. What are you going to do? What happens next week if Tennessee were to lose to Vanderbilt? I don't know. Vanderbilt's a pretty good football team. I don't know what they're going to do. Are you going to leave out an 11-win Power 4 team? That'd be a shame. But would the committee do it? I think I got to see the rankings first before I make definitive statements there. But speaking of definitive statements, one that I have made consistently is Penn State is a good football team, but they are not great. So the rule half continued for Penn State and the Nittany Lions. They win by one single solitary point. Now, yes, it would have been by 3 if they hadn't had an extra point blocked, but they had an extra point blocked in return for 2, and Minnesota almost did it. They were almost rowing that boat, but one of the oars broke off in the fourth quarter, and Penn State was able to snatch it up, attach it to their boat, and row on to 10-1. Penn State next week has got Maryland at home. I thought Maryland would pull an upset this week. They did not, so Penn State's going to be fine. Penn State 11-1. Congratulations. You're not in the Big Ten championship game, so you're going to get a little bit of off time here, and you're going to be in the college football playoff. The perennial bridesmaid in the college football playoff is going to get invited, and Penn State's good. Penn State's a good football team. You could not convince me to place any amount of money, I don't care if it's 10 cents, on Penn State to win the national championship. Now, is Minnesota a tough place to play in November? Absolutely can be. You talk about Big Ten football. Yeah, Minnesota embodies that. But this Penn State team, someone's going to get to them. I don't know who they're going to match up with in the playoff. But I've got some TCU vibes here with Penn State. I've got some vibes of, yeah, they deserve to be in the playoff because results have to matter above all else. But someone is going to put together a complete game. And Ohio State didn't put together a complete game, by the way, when they played them in Happy Valley a few weeks ago. That wasn't a complete Ohio State game. Will Howard threw a pick 6 and turned the ball over at the goal line. He doesn't do those things. That's a different game. But they did. Penn State forced those mistakes, and they deserve full credit for it. But if Ohio State were to play the way that they did against Indiana today, against Penn State again, that's Ohio State by 20. That is absolutely Ohio State by 20. Now, Penn State does deserve credit. Going on the road in conference to a good team late in the year when everybody's a little beat up, it's not an easy thing to do. We watched Oregon struggle with Wisconsin last week. Oregon's on a bye this week, and I guarantee you the Ducks are very thankful for that for many reasons. It is not easy to go on the road. Penn State should be rewarded for the win, not punished. But I continue to raise questions about how good they truly are and what their ceiling actually is. They are going to be a matchup-dependent team for me as to whether I could see them winning a college football playoff game. I think if you catch the wrong at-large team who's not a conference champion, I think Penn State could get rolled in the first round. They're not going to get a bye. They're going to get to host a playoff game. That's going to be undoubtedly one of the best parts of the 12-team playoff is places like Penn State or Tennessee, perhaps, depending on how the seeding shakes out. Home playoff game environments, electric. I'm here for it. And Penn State deserves it. I do not have a lot of confidence in them with the way they've been playing in the last couple of weeks. So we'll see. We'll see how they do against Maryland. I imagine they will be just fine. We'll see who they match up with. I think that's going to depend entirely if they're able to have any sort of postseason success. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.